Oof, 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 oof. Is this live? I really cannot tell. Oh, it is? Nope. See anything there yet? Oh, okay, all right. There we go. Uh, cool. And welcome to the Daily Bible Reading Show. I'm not sure if this is working as it should. Yeah, okay. Hi, hello again. I'm Calvin. I am going to be reading from this ancient document that's called the Proslogion. Here it is. Here's the Proslogion, and I'm going to be reading this live on YouTube. I have no idea how long this is. I've never read it before. But the reason I'm reading this is because I have to write a report on this book, on something that Anselm, the author, wrote 1,000 years ago, on something called the ontological argument. And it's contained somewhere in these pages. So I thought I'd read through it, try to get a sense of what he was saying in this document and share it with you online. Yeah, so that's the plan. Again, this is Proslogion. Um, it was written in 1903 by Saint Anselm of Canterbury. And this is the preface. I formerly published at the instance of certain of my brethren a little work in which, assuming the person of one who by silent reasoning with himself is searching for a knowledge he does not yet possess, I gave an example of the manner in which we may meditate concerning the grounds of our faith. But afterwards, when I considered that this work was put together by the interweaving of a great number of arguments, I began to ask myself whether there might not perhaps be found some one argument which should have no need of any other argument beside itself to prove it. It might suffice by itself to demonstrate that God really exists and is the supreme good, which needeth nothing beside itself to give it being or well-being, but which nothing else can have either the one or the other. Three long sentences. And whereof all other things are true, which we believe concerning the divine essence. And when, after many times earnestly directing my thoughts to this matter, it sometimes seemed to me that what I sought was just within my grasp, but sometimes that it eluded my mind's sight altogether. At last, I resolved in despair to renounce the search for a thing, the discovery whereof was beyond my powers. But this train of thought, so soon as I desired to lay it aside, lest it should hinder my mind while vainly occupied therein from attending to other matters which might be more profitable to me, at once began to press itself, as it were, importunately upon me, unwilling and reluctant as I was to entertain it. And so one day, when I was wearied out with violently resisting this importunity, in the midst of the struggle of my thoughts, there so presented itself to me the very thing which I had given up hope of finding, that I hastened to embrace that very train of thought which I was but a moment ago anxiously thrusting from me. Thinking, therefore, that if I wrote down what I so greatly rejoiced to have found, it would please others who might read it, I wrote the following little work, treating of this and of some other matters in the character of one striving to raise his thoughts to the contemplation of God and seeking to understand what he already believes. And because neither this nor the other treatise which I mentioned before seemed to me worthy to be called a book, or to have the writer's name set in the front of it, and yet I thought I must not let them go without some title to invite those to read into those hands they might come, I gave a name to each, calling the former an example of meditation on the grounds of faith, and the latter faith in search of understanding. But when both had been often transcribed under these titles by divers persons, was constrained by many, and especially by Hugh, the Reverend Archbishop of Lyon and legate of the Apostolic See in Gaul, who laid his commands upon me in virtue of his apostolical authority to prefix my name to them. And so that this might be done more fittingly, I've called the former monologion, that is the soliloquy, and this proslogion, that is the address. That's the preface. Wow, okay. If it's very, very wordy, but if this is how it's going to go, it's going to be very, very long sentences. Okay, so I'm going to carry on. This is chapter 1 of Proslogion. Come now, thou poor child of a man, turn a while from thy business, hide thyself from for a little time from restless thoughts. Cast away thy troublesome cares, put aside thy wearisome distractions. Give thyself a little leisure to converse with God, and take thy rest a while in him. Enter into the secret chamber of thy heart. Leave everything without but God, and what may help thee to seek after him. And when thou hast shut the door, then do thou seek him. Say now, O my whole heart, say now to God, I seek thy face. Thy face, Lord, do I seek. Come now then, O Lord my God, teach thou my heart when and how I may seek thee, where and how may I find thee. O Lord, if thou art not here, where else shall I seek thee? But if thou art everywhere, why do I not behold thee, since thou art here present? Surely indeed, thou dwellest in a light which no man can approach unto. But where is that light unapproachable? Or how may I approach unto it, since it is unapproachable? Or who can lead me and bring me into it, that I may see thee therein? Again, by what token shall I know thee? In what form shall I look for thee? I have never seen thee, O Lord my God, I know not thy form. What shall I do then, O Lord Most High? What shall I do, banished as I am so far from thee? What shall thy servant do that is sick for love of thee, and yet is cast away from thy presence? He panteth to behold thee, and yet thy presence is very far from him. He longeth to approach unto thee, and yet thy dwelling place is unapproachable. He desireth to find thee, yet he knoweth not thy habitation. He would fain seek thee, yet he knoweth not thy face. O Lord, thou art my God, thou art my Lord, and I've never beheld thee. Thou hast created me and created me anew, and all things that I have hast thou bestowed upon me, and yet I have never known thee. Nay, I was created to behold thee, and yet have I never unto this day done that for the sake whereof I was created. O miserable lot of man, to have lost that whereunto he was created. O hard and terrible condition. Alas, what hath he lost? What hath he found? What hath departed from him? What hath continued with him? He hath lost the blessedness whereunto he was created, and hath found the misery whereunto he was not created, that without which nothing is happy, hath departed from him, and that hath continued with him, which by itself cannot but be miserable. Once man did eat angels' food, after which he now hungereth, now he eateth the bread of affliction, which then he knew not. Alas, for the common woe of man, the universal sorrow of the children of Adam. Our first father was filled with abundance. We sigh with hunger. He was rich. We are beggars. He miserably threw away that in the possession whereof he was happy, and in the lack whereof we are miserable. After which we lamentably long and alas, abide unsatisfied. Why did he not keep for us, when he might easily have kept it, that the loss whereof so grievously afflicts us? Wherefore did he so overcloud our day, and plunge us into darkness? Why did he take from us our life, and bring upon us the pains of death? Wretches that we are, whence we have been driven out and whither? From our native country into banishment, from the vision of God into blindness, from the joy of immortality into the bitterness and horror of death. How sad the change from so great good to so great evil. Grievous is the loss, and grievous the pain, grievous everything. But alas for me, one of the miserable children of Eve, cast far away from God. Where did I begin? And what have I accomplished? And what did I aim? And unto what have I attained? To what did I aspire? And where am I now sighing? I sought good, and behold, trouble. I aimed at God, and have stumbled upon myself. I sought rest in my secret chamber, and I found tribulation and grief in the inmost parts. I desire to laugh for gladness of spirit, and am constrained to roar for the disquietness of my heart. I hoped for joy, and behold, increase of sorrow. How long, O Lord, how long? How long, O Lord, wilt thou forget us? How long wilt thou hide thy face from us? When wilt thou turn and hearken upon us? When wilt thou enlighten our eyes and show us thy face? When wilt thou restore thy presence to us? Turn and took upon us, O Lord, hearken unto us, enlighten us, show us thyself. Restore to us thy presence, that it may be well with us, for without thee it goeth very ill with us. Have pity upon our labors and strivings after thee, for without thee we can do nothing. Thou callest us, help us to obey the call. I beseech thee, O Lord, that I may not despair in my sighing, but may draw full of breath again in hope. My heart is embittered by its desolation. With thy consolation, I beseech thee, O Lord. Make it sweet again. I beseech thee, O Lord, for in my hunger I've begun to seek thee. Suffer me not to depart from thee fasting. I have come to thee fainting for lack of food. Let me not go empty away. I have come to thee as the poor man to the rich, as the miserable to the merciful. Let me not return unsatisfied and despised. And if before I be fed, I sigh, grant me that, though after I've sighed, I may be fed. O Lord, I am bent downwards. I cannot look up. Raise me up, that I may lift mine eyes to heaven. My iniquities are gone over my head. They overwhelm me. They are like a sore burden, too heavy for me to bear. Deliver me, take away my burden, lest the pit of my wickedness shut its mouth upon me. Grant unto me that I may look upon thy light, though from afar off, though out of the deep. I will seek thee with longing after thee. I will long after thee in seeking thee. I will find thee by loving thee. I will love thee in finding thee. I confess to thee, O Lord, and I give thanks unto thee, because thou hast created in me this thine image, that I may remember thee, think upon thee, love thee, but so darkened in thine image in me by the smoke of my sins, that it cannot do that whereunto it was created, unless thou renew it and create it again. I seek not, O Lord, to search out thy depth, but I desire in some measure to understand thy truth, which my heart believeth and loveth. Nor do I seek to understand that I may believe, but I believe that I may understand. For this too I believe, that unless I first believe, I shall not understand. That's chapter 1. Whoa, it's very, very long. Okay, let's move on to chapter 2. Let's just check if it's still live. Yeah, okay, it is. All right then. Okay, let's move on to chapter 2. Therefore, O Lord, who grantest to faith understanding, grant unto me that so far as thou knowest it to be expedient for me, I may understand that thou art as we believe, and also that thou art what we believe thee to be. And of a truth, we believe that thou art somewhat than which no greater can be conceived. That's interesting. That's the definition of God in the ontological argument, is that thou art somewhat than which no greater can be conceived. This is chapter 2. Is there then nothing real that can be thus described? For the fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. Yet surely even that fool himself, when he hears me speak of somewhat than which nothing greater can be conceived, understands what he hears, and what he understands is in his understanding, even if he does not understand that it really exists. It is one thing for a thing to be in the understanding, and another to understand that the thing really exists. For when a painter considers the work which he is to make, he has it indeed in his understanding, but he doth not yet understand that really to exist, which as yet he has not made. But when he has painted his picture, then he both has the picture in his understanding and also understands it really to exist. Thus, even the fool is certain that something exists, at least in his understanding, than which nothing greater can be conceived. Because when he hears this mentioned, he understands it. And whatsoever is understood exists in understanding. And surely that then which no greater can be conceived cannot exist only in the understanding. For if it exists indeed in the understanding only, it can be thought to exist also in reality. And real existence is more than existence in the understanding only. If then that then which no greater can be conceived exists in the understanding only, then that than which no greater can be conceived is something a greater than which can be conceived. But this is impossible. Therefore, it is certain that something than which no greater can be conceived exists both in understanding and also in reality. So that was really long. But I think he's comparing the God whom you imagine, the God that you can imagine to be the greatest thing, that nothing else can compare to it, and what he calls that than which no greater can be conceived. So the greatest thing you can conceive. And it compares something that is in reality. And to say that it exists only in the mind is to say that the God in your mind is greater than the God in reality, which is a contradiction in terms. So therefore, he's saying it cannot be so. It cannot be that God only exists in your mind. And you agree that you can conceive of God, that you can actually have God, think of God in your mind. Therefore, to think of that God as greater than God in reality, it's a contradiction in logic, and therefore God must exist in reality. If he exists in the mind, he must exist in both. I think that's his argument. So that's chapter 2, where he presents the ontological argument for God, speaking to someone who may not believe in God. That's really interesting. That just his conception of God is enough for him to um, know that there really is a God, I guess. Yeah. Chapter 3. Okay. It's also a short chapter, so good. That's encouraging. So this is chapter 3. Not only does this something than which no greater can be conceived exist, but it exists in so true a sense that it cannot even be conceived not to exist. For it is possible to form the conception of an object whose non-existence shall be inconceivable, and such an object of necessity greater than any object whose existence is conceivable. Wherefore, if that than which no greater can be conceived not to exist, it follows that than which no greater can be conceived is not that than which no greater can be conceived. For there can be thought a greater than it, namely an object whose non-existence shall be inconceivable. And this brings us to a contradiction. And thus it is proved that that thing than which no greater can be conceived exists in so true a sense that it cannot even be conceived not to exist. And this thing art thou, O Lord our God. And so thou, O Lord my God, existest in so true a sense that thou canst not even be conceived not to exist. And this is as fitting. For if any mind could conceive aught better than thee, then the creature would be ascending above the creator and judging the creator, which is a supposition very absurd. Thou therefore dost exist in a truer sense than all else beside thee, and art more real than all else beside thee, because whatsoever else existeth in a less true sense than thou, and therefore is less real than thou. Why then, said the fool in his heart, there is no God, when it is so plain to a rational mind that thou art more real? than anything else. Why? Except that he is a fool indeed. So I must confess, I don't quite follow completely. I might need to read through this chapter a few more times. But what I find really compelling is how he speaks to God directly. He's just been talking about God conceptually, but here he is speaking to God directly, but how it cannot even be conceived that God does not exist, and how to conceive of a God only in our minds is essentially to subject God to our minds, to subject the creator to the creation. He says that's absurd. That's what he calls it. Yeah, it's silly. And so it turns to devotion. It's not just philosophy, it's adoration of God, especially of his being, his greatness in its existence, and the fact that we can actually have this relationship with this God. I think that's what captures his emotions, his adoration, just his awe of God. Excuse me. Yeah, okay, chapter 4. But how come the fool to say in his heart that which he could not conceive? Or how came he to be able not to conceive that which yet he said in his heart? For it may be thought that to conceive and to say in one's heart are one and the same thing. If it is true, nay, because it is true that he conceived it, because he said it in his heart, and also true that he did not say it in his heart because he could not conceive it, it follows that there are two senses in which something may be understood to be conceived or said in the heart. For in one sense, we are said to have a conception of something, when we have a conception of the word that signifies it, and in another sense, when we understand what the thing really is. In the former sense, then, we may say that God is conceived not to exist, but in the latter, he cannot by means be conceived not to exist. For no man that understandeth what fire and water mean can conceive that fire is really water, though he may have this conception as far as the words go. Thus, in like manner, no man that understandeth what God is can conceive that God does not exist, although he may say these words, that God does not exist, either with no meaning at all, or with some other meaning than that which they properly bear. For God, than what that sorry, but for God is that than which no greater can be conceived. He who well understandeth what this is certainly understandeth it to be such cannot even be conceived not to exist. Whosoever therefore understandeth in this way that God exists cannot conceive that he does not exist. Thanks be to thee, O good Lord, thanks be to thee. Because that which heretofore I believe by thy grace, I now by thine illumination thus understand. So that even though I should not believe, should not wish to believe in thine existence, I cannot but understand that thou dost exist. Okay, chapter 5. What then art thou, Lord God? Thou than which nothing greater can be conceived. What indeed, but that supreme good, which being alone of all things self-existence, didst make all things, all other things beside thee out of nothing. For whatsoever is not this is less than can be conceived. But thou canst not be conceived to be less than the highest conceivable. What good thing is lacking to the supreme good, whereon depends the being of every good thing beside? Thou therefore art righteous, true, blessed, and hast all attributes which it is better to have than to be without. For it is better to be righteous than not righteous, and blessed than not blessed. Chapter 6. But since it is better to have perception or to have omnipotence, to be pitiful or to be without passions, than not to have these attributes, how hast thou perception if thou art not a body? Or omnipotence if thou canst not do everything? Or how art thou at one and the same time pitiful and without passions? For if only bodily things have perceptions, since the senses with which we perceive belong and attach to the body, how canst thou have perception, since thou art not a body, but the supreme spirit, which is higher than a body can be? But if perception is only knowledge, or a means towards knowledge, Since he who perceives has knowledge thereby, according to the special character of the senses, by sight of colors, by taste of savors, and so forth, then whatsoever has knowledge, in whatsoever manner may be said without impropriety in some sense to perceive. Therefore, O Lord, although thou art not a body, yet of a truth thou hast in this sense perception in the highest degree, since thou knowest all things in the highest degree, but not in a sense wherein an animal that has knowledge by means of bodily feeling is said to have perception. Chapter 7. But again, how canst thou be omnipotent if thou canst not do all things? Yet if thou canst not suffer corruption, canst not lie, canst not make what is true to be false, and what is done undone, and so forth, how canst thou do all things? Or shall we say that to be capable of these would be not power, but rather impotence? For he who can do these can do what is not expedient for him and what he ought not. And the more he can do what is not expedient for him and what he ought not, the more power have evil and wickedness over him, and the less power hath he against them. He therefore that can do such things can do them in virtue, not of power, but of impotence. For he is said to be able to do them, not because he himself has power in doing them, but because his impotence gives something else power to work in him. Or else, in an improper way of speaking, such as we often use when we put to be for not to be, and to do for not to do, or to do nothing. For we often say to one who says that a thing is not such and such, it is as you say it is, when it would seem more proper to say, it is not as you say it is not. Again, we say, this man sits as that man does, or this man rests as that man does, though sitting is a kind of not doing, and resting is doing nothing. Thus, when a man is said to have the power of doing, or undergoing what is not expedient for him, or what he ought not to, the word power signifies impotence, since the more power of this sort he has, the more power have evil and wickedness against him, and the less hath he against them. Therefore, O Lord God, thou art all the more truly omnipotent, that thou canst do nothing that is done through impotence, and nothing hath any power against thee. I must admit, that was totally over my head. Something about God being omnipotent if he only has the ability to do nothing, I think. Yeah. Chapter 8. Once again, how art thou at the same time pitiful and yet without passions? For unless thou have passions, thou wilt not have compassion. If thou hast not compassion, thy heart is not made sorry by compassion. That is by fellow feeling with the sorrowful. And that is what pity is. Yet if thou art not pitiful, whence have the sorrowful so great consolation from thee? How then canst thou at once be and not be pitiful, O Lord, unless because thou art pitiful in respect of us, and art not pitiful in sense of thyself? For thou art pitiful to our apprehension, and art not pitiful to thine own. For when thou hast respect to us in our sorrow, we perceive the effects of pity, but thou feelest not the emotion thereof. And thus thou art pitiful in that thou savest the wretched, and sparest those that sin against thee. And yet against thou art not moved by a fellow feeling with our misery. Okay, all right. We come to chapter 9. It's a long one. It's a long one. Okay, so this is chapter 9. Again, how dost thou spare the wicked, if thou art holy and supremely just? For how dost thou, being holy and supremely just, do aught that is not just? And what manner of justice is that? To give eternal life to one that deserves eternal death. Whence then, O good God, good both to the good and to the evil, whence is it that thou savest the evil? If to save the evil is not just, and yet thou doest nothing that is not just? Or is it because thy goodness is incomprehensible, that this lieth hid in that light unapproachable, which is thy dwelling place? Verily, it is the most deep and secret abyss of thy goodness, that there lieth hid the fountain, whence floweth the river of thy mercy. For though thou art holy and supremely just, yet art thou also gracious to the wicked, because thou art holy and supremely good. For thou wouldest be less good if thou wert not gracious to any that was evil. For better that is he who is both good to the good and evil than he is good to the good only, and better is he who is good to evil both in punishing and in sparing them than he who is good in punishing them only. Therefore thou art pitiful, because thou art holy and supremely good. And although perchance we suppose that we see reason why thou dost reward good to the good and evil to the evil, yet certainly we must be filled with wonder why thou, being holy and supremely just and having need of nothing, renderest good to the evil and those who sin against thee. O the depth of thy goodness, O God! We see we both see whence thou art merciful, and yet see it only in part. We perceive whence the river flows, yet behold not the fountain from which it springs. For it is of the plenitude of thy goodness that thou art kind to them that have sinned against thee. And yet it lieth hid in the depth of thy goodness, wherefore this is so. Verily, although it is thy goodness that thou rewardest good to good and evil to evil, yet this is the rule of justice seems to require. But when thou rewardest good to the evil, then we know that the supremely good will to do that. Yet wonder that the supremely just was able to do so to thy to will. Sorry. O thou mercy of God, from how abundant a sweetness, from how sweet an abundance flowest thou forth unto us. O boundless goodness of God, how ought we sinners to be moved by love of thee. For thou savest the just, justice assenting, but deliverest the wicked when justice condemns them. Thou savest the just by help of their deserts. Thou deliverest the wicked against their deserts. Thou savest the just, acknowledging them in them the good which thou didn't give them. Thou deliverest the wicked, pardoning the evil which thou hatest. O immeasurable goodness, passing all understanding goodness, let there flow into me that mercy which floweth out of their goodness. Spare in thy mercy and take not vengeance in thy justice, for although it to be hard to understand how thy mercy is not parted from thy justice, yet it is necessary to believe that it is not at enmity with thy justice, that it floweth from thy goodness, that it is not without justice, nay, in truth accordeth with thy justice. For if thou art merciful only because thou art supremely good, and art supremely good only because thou art supremely just, therefore art thou in truth merciful because thou art supremely just. Help me, O just and merciful God, for I seek thy light. Help me that I may understand what I say. Verily, then thou art merciful because thou art just. Is then thy mercy born of thy justice? Dost thou then out of justice spare the wicked? If it be so, O Lord, if it be so, teach me how it is so. Is it because it is just that thou shouldest so be good that thou couldst not be conceived better, and shouldest work so mightily that thou couldst not be conceived mightier? For what is juster than this? Yet this would not be if thou wert good in punishing only, not in sparing, and if thou madest them good only that were merely not good, and not only those that were evil. And so it is just that thou shouldst spare the wicked, and make them that were wicked to be good. Lastly, what is not done justly ought not to be done, and what ought not to be done is done unjustly. If then thou dost not have mercy on the wicked justly, then thou hast mercy on them unjustly. And since it were blasphemy to say this, it is fit to believe that thou hast mercy on the wicked justly. And with that, I'm spent. I'm done. I'm done. I'll read chapter 10. It's short, and I'll stop there. Okay, chapter 10. But it is also just, but that thou shouldest punish the wicked. For what is more just than that the good should receive good things and the evil, evil things? How then is it just for thee both to punish the wicked and also to spare them? For when thou dost punish the wicked, it is just, because it is agreeable to their deserts. But when thou sparest them, it is just also, because though it befitteth not their deserts, yet it befitteth thy goodness. For in sparing the wicked, thou art in respect of thyself, though not in respect of us, just as thou art pitiful in respect of us and not in respect of thyself, since in saving us whom thou mightest have destroyed, thou art pitiful, not that thou art thyself moved by the feeling of pity, but that we feel the effect of pity. And in the same manner, thou art just, not that thou hast rendered to us what we have deserved, but that thou dost what becometh thee, that supremely good. Thus dost thou without contradiction punish justly and justly spare. That's it. That's it. I'm done. I'm done. that was a lot. And I think it's not just the length of the reading, but just the unwieldy canst and thou and shouldest, and it's just really hard to pronounce. But yeah, I think I get the the train of thought. Anselm is meditating upon God's goodness and power and greatness, but then he talks about how is it that God can spare us? How is it that God can forgive us? If he's supremely good, supremely just, he should punish the evil. He should punish the wicked, but actually he saves and he forgives the wicked, meaning us. And he thinks about God's pity, even though he says, God is not just experiencing the emotional pity, but that we experience the effects of his pity, that he looks upon us as pitiful and wretched. And therefore, when he saves us, it is out of that pity, but it's also out of that justice. That means he justly saves us, he justly forgives us. Not that he does so in a way that sidesteps his justice and his power and his goodness, but it's because he is just, because he is powerful, he is able to save, and he wants to save us. Yeah. Okay, all right, I'm going to stop here. At chapter 10 of the Proslogion, I don't think I can make it all the way to chapter 27. But yeah, there you go. There you go. That was fun. That was fun. Yeah, thanks for joining me. This is my daily Bible reading show looking at Anselm's Proslogion, chapters 1 to 10. Take care. God bless and bye-bye. Shh.